Let's continue our discussion on language. So now I want to talk about verbal adjustments, and these are ways to react in real time to different situations that can arise. And the first thing we should discuss is navigational phrases. So these are phrases or words that allow you to respond to someone, but still refocus the conversation back to where you want it to go for a variety of reasons. And this could happen in several different situations. A really sort of classic example would be you're giving a speech and you're talking about topic A. Somebody raises a question that could steer the conversation over to B, C, and D, and it's just not really what you want to focus on. It might be something that's sort of beyond the purposes of your conversation. There, it's not going to be meaning it's not going to be helpful to your audience, right, to discuss it, and so you kind of have to steer it back, right? And you want to find sort of a tactful way to do that, an effective way to do that, that's not only just going to refocus it, but not offend the audience and that sort of stuff. There's other situations where, even in interpersonal settings, where a conversation could be veering off course and it's no longer really productive to go there. So, we're going to talk about some of those situations. So, here are some navigational phrases that people often use. And if you take a leadership or management class, they'll certainly talk about this in those types of trainings. And you may have already experienced this in the workplace where you talk to a supervisor and they will use some of these phrases. So that may be true, but I understand, however, oh, that's terrible. Okay, so an example of using one of these navigational phrases. So let's start right off where you've probably experienced this the most, and that's with situations where you have to show sympathy or empathy. So, oh, that's terrible. So sometimes you'll be talking to somebody and they're talking to you about something that's really really significant for them and emotionally charged, maybe in a negative way, right? And so like if you think of an interpersonal setting, this is like when somebody just they're really upset about something and they just need to talk, right? Now there's a lot of times where that's really healthy. Okay, so when you get to, sometimes you just need to get something off your chest, right? You just need somebody to vent to, you need a shoulder to cry on, and there's a real value in that, right? Of just talking and getting it out. But obviously, there kind of becomes a point where it's no longer productive, right? So this is kind of like, let's say your friend is going through something that's really difficult, but you've already talked to them about it a million times. It's kind of at that point where they kind of need to move forward, but they still kind of want to relitigate it or rehash it over and over and over. And it's just not healthy anymore, right? Like you're just sort of in this spiral. I mentioned in an earlier video that a quote that I love is, when you're drowning, it doesn't help to just spend all your time describing the water, right? Or to just sit there describing the water. Because if when you're drowning, all you do is talk about how the water's deep, it's cold, and I see sharks, right? That's not going to help you survive the situation. It's not going to help you move forward. Again, there is a value sometimes in sort of wallowing in a situation or having to vent about it, right? Sometimes you need to kind of sort of go through the stages of grief or feel the pain of an event in order to move forward. But there's also that point where you got to stop describing the water, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So in those situations, let's say you're dealing with that friend, and again, if you just tell them to get over it, that's probably not going to go over very well, right? They're going to kind of get offended. Even you could be right; they kind of need to get over it, right? Or maybe some of it's their fault, and you kind of want to tell them like, "Well, you kind of did it to yourself, bro," right? So but if you do that, even if you're right, they're still gonna like lash out at you, right? It's not gonna go over well. Like you have to decide, do you want to be right or do you want to accomplish your goal? Or do you want to accomplish what's healthy and productive, right? Which is to get them to kind of move forward. So instead of doing that, and I experience this too in my field. So sometimes you'll have clients come in, I do a lot of divorce, domestic relations type cases, so custody, divorce, things like that. And these are emotionally charged situations. And I'll have a client come in and they're basically telling me how their ex is the spawn of Satan, right? And I'm listening to them, and hey, I've seen their Instagram. Maybe they are the spawn of Satan, right? And they seem awful, and they just kind of want to vent. Now, here's the issue. That's maybe important to them, and that's maybe healthy for them. Maybe they haven't hit that stage where they're just too much describing the water and need to move on. But the issue is some of the stuff they're venting to me about just isn't legally relevant, right? It's not going to help them move their case forward, right? So it's just not productive necessarily for them to be telling me this. And so I've got to get them to kind of move forward. Now, I can't just say, yeah, oh, yeah, Anyway, sucks for you. So let's talk about clause 3, right? Or let's talk about the payment you owe me this month. Like you're going to sound like an insensitive jerk, right? It's just like in that interpersonal situation with your friend where if you just tell them to get over it, right, they're not going to react well. So in this situation, you kind of need to move things forward, whether it's the friend who needs to move on or in my job environment, I got to get them to like, let's talk about what matters. So if you just use a navigational phrase, oh, that's terrible. I'm really sorry, that must be difficult. Before you say, let's move on, it's amazing how just that one sentence, that one half a sentence, right? That one little phrase makes people feel a little bit better though about moving forward. So in that client situation, if I say, that's really terrible. I wish that, it's unfortunate. I see that a lot in these cases where people, they just don't focus on what's important. And if you have kids, what's important is for this separation to work out amicably. I can't talk today. To work out in a good fashion, right? For the kids, so it's not stressful on them, right? Focus on doing what's best for the kids and not getting back at each other. And so, oh, that's terrible. I really hope things improve. But all you can do is kind of control what you can control, which is your actions, how you interact with the kids, the things you're doing to move the divorce along. So I show some sort of sympathy. I say, oh, that's terrible. I really hope things improve before I say, let's get back to focusing on what matters, right? And obviously I say it in a way a little more tactful than saying, let's focus on what matters. But I get them to move forward by just using that phrase. And with your friend who needs to move forward, they're just venting to you and they kind of need to move on from it. You just saying, I understand this is really difficult. I get it, right? This is going to, like especially like, let's say talking about a breakup, like sometimes it just needs time. And that's going to be difficult. That is hard and that is terrible. And you didn't deserve for this to happen. And then you try to steer, then you say the thing that gets them to move forward. All right, so they were talking about A, let's talk about B, right? But just using that navigational phrase suggests that you have empathy and sympathy, and it really works. That may be true, but so again, spinning the conversation. So somebody wants a raise. They go into their boss's office and say, I've been taking on a lot of extra projects lately. We've had a lot of turnover. I think I deserve a raise. So the boss, I mentioned you would have seen this sometimes maybe in work environments. The boss will just spit back, that may be true, but it's done annually. Every year, corporate reviews things in December for January to issue the raises. So it's out of my hands. Hands are tied, right? And so their way of, instead of versus, let's say they just said no raise for you, no can do, mi amigo, right? You're probably going to take that as a little bit of a cold response, right? Either way, the person basically said, I can't do anything about it. It's out of my hands are tied, right? It's just that when you say that may be true, but it's, corporate does it. They do it every year. It's kind of it's a yearly thing. They crunch the numbers. It's not really done just at random. So that saying that may be true, but and giving a little bit of an explanation steers that conversation back to no, but in a more tactful way. Or in that exact same situation where you say, I understand, however, this is still what we're doing. So again, you see bosses do this all the time, where they come in the room, they say, we're going to do A, and A is not popular. Right? And people are like, I don't want to do A. And then the boss just basically says, I understand, however, we're doing A. Right? And look, they didn't really respond to you, but using those phrases helps keep things focused. It sort of steers the conversation. Now, and you can also weaponize that to your advantage. So go back to that raise scenario. So the person says, let's say you're the one asking for the raise. And the boss says, well, corporate does it every year. It's an annual thing. It's out of my hands. If you say that may be true, but we've had more turnover than we normally do, and than we expected when I was hired. Or you're having me take on extra projects that we didn't anticipate. So I still think I deserve a raise. So basically, you just said, you walked in, you said A, they said B, impossible, can't do it, corporate does it, and you just said that may be true, but A, I want a raise. Because think about it, all those things you just said. Hey, man, I'm doing more projects than we originally anticipated. We've had higher turnover than we originally anticipated. Did I address that corporate handles the raises? Nope. Did I address that it's only done in December to start the next January? Nope. Didn't even talk about it. Right? And I still got right back to, I'm going to need that raise. Right? So you can use them yourself. That may be true, but I understand, however, and then you refocus the conversation. So these sound a little, I think these sound a little corny, but they really do work. You'd be surprised. of just, showing that kind of empathy or sympathy in a situation, or knowing how to kind of steer it back, really can help you keep things focused. Another kind of real world thing that I just wanted to touch on, because this is something that I see happen that really gets people in trouble in a business standpoint. So, and here's what it is. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going into business, things like that, you're going to have to be prepared to explain things in different ways. So, the reality is, like, the really slick people, like the people that are like great closers, for example, like while most people can get like a 65% conversion rate, meaning when I say conversion rate, I mean 65% of people exposed to the product, the product or service, the offer, will say yes. So let's say that's the average, and then there's these rock stars who can get an 85%. Right? It's like, well, what are they doing? Now, a lot of times, I mean, they're doing a lot of things. It's not just this. But one of the things they're doing is they already know ahead of time, walking into a situation, that if I want to get you to do something, here are the 4 most likely ways. I've already researched it. I already know what they are. And I know what's number 1. I know what's number 2, right? And so forth. So they start out with number 1. And if that's not working, they just on the fly switch to 2 or 3 or what have you. So what's going on there? They are prepared to explain things in different ways. So you got to have more than one example. You got to have, excuse me, different ways to get them to realize, to sort of get your point across. So that's just a real world thing to think about it. Don't just pick one. Man, sorry, excuse me, I got the hiccups. Don't just pick one lane and hope that it works. Now, here's another big real life thing that just gets people in trouble. When you respond to a question, so you like, somebody asks you a question, answer it, say you'll look into it, or tell them where they can get the answer. And if you do offer an answer, just confirm, like, does that answer your question? Now, when I say this gets people in trouble, here's what they do. Somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer. So people will just like blur it out, I guess. Now, why is that? They don't want to admit they don't know, right? You got to be willing to admit you don't know in real settings. This isn't your friends. We're trying to save face. This isn't when you're just trying to not look bad in a particular, not trying to look bad in a conversation. So you just you bluff a little and you throw something out there to make yourself look good, or sound like you know the answer, but you don't really know the answer. Because here's what happens. People will unfortunately have a tendency to not want to admit they don't know. So they blurt out a guess, right? Other people then rely on that information. They spend time and money relying on your information. And because you got it wrong, because you guessed and you didn't really know, they're now pissed because they relied on that advice. Remember, in a lot of fields, part of what they're paying and hiring you for is your opinion, your advice, your knowledge, your information. So don't say crap you don't know. Don't, just because you don't want to admit you don't know. Because when they rely on that, here's how this goes bad for you. What happens? Well, those are the people that want their money back. Those are the people that complain about you. And in today's age, those are the people that run to the internet and trash you online. Good luck getting that fixed, right? Like, sites don't just take that. It's just out there forever, right? And so this is there's more of a minefield right now for people who are entrepreneurs, or you're going to be in the business of persuading people, and people sort of evaluating your credibility and judgment. If you're in those types of situations, I'm just saying, when I say it's a minefield, what I mean is it's a much more difficult landscape to traverse, because it used to be 20, 30 years ago where if somebody wasn't happy with an experience, okay, they weren't happy, and maybe they told some of their friends and you lost a couple customers or potential clients, but that was the end of it. Well, now, because of the internet, right, that can really affect you far and wide. So don't do that. So what are some options you can do? Again, just say you need to look into it. Now, can you find artful ways to say that to make you look a little better? Sure, you can. It doesn't mean you can't massage it. You don't have to say, like, beats the hell out of me. Good question, Earl. Like, you can say something that makes you sound like, you still have the pulse of the situation. You just got to look up a few things. So a classic example of that is, if now there's some situations you can't do this because of the area law, but if somebody asks me a question I just really don't know the answer to, I will say something to the effect of, well, look, the laws vary by state, by jurisdiction, even by county sometimes. So I got to look in to see what your county does. So let me look into that, and then I'll get back to you. I don't want, and you can even say, hey, I don't want to give you misinformation. This is very complicated. It's changing, and again, it really varies by region. So let me check it out. And so, first of all, you said it in a way that doesn't just make you look dumb. And second of all, in some respects, people will appreciate that, right? So you just do that. So be willing to admit that you don't know, I guess, is my point. It's just something that people, they get into these real situations and they just don't do. I know some people. I know there's some businesses that what they will do is, if people bring to them a question or a problem they're really not quite sure about, or sure, like certain aspects, or they're not quite sure how to handle it, sometimes what they'll do is they'll say, well, you can hire me to do some initial background, workup of the situation, and then we'll go at that point we'll cross the next bridge. We'll decide if I can, if I can handle the project. So you can, sometimes people will frame it like that, as sort of like, let me look into some things, and then I'll let you know. But be willing to do that. Be willing to just admit that. Don't just try to like guess and potentially be wrong and have people kill you for it. All right, this thing called three, and I know we're jumping around a lot of things because language is such a broad topic. Like, you could cover so many things with this, and I'm jumping around from just different ways to use language, whether it's like the empowering situation or using Rogerian arguments and things like this, and now purposes of rhetoric. So I know rhetoric, and then it impacts on language. So I know we're dovetailing on a lot of things, interpersonal settings, professional settings, and all these different uses. And it's just because this is really such a vast category. So I'm trying to sort of pick some of what I think are the more significant ones, but I know we're kind of jumping around to a lot of topics. So bear with me. We got sort of two more main concepts to talk about. So the last one here is, or the second to last one here, is what's called three purposes of rhetoric. And what this is referring to is basically just saying that with your language, and here we're pretty much talking about professional settings where people are, you're trying to have to persuade people, or it's one-on-one, or public speaking, or things like that. But we're really kind of focusing on those settings and like persuasion and language. But this is basically, so rhetoric just means language, right? So what this is basically saying is, with your language, you can accomplish three basic things. So one is establish credibility, provide value, and then the third one is inspire action. Okay. And by the way, so basically this is a checklist. It doesn't have to be in this order, although usually you establish credibility first. But you basically just, when you have a message, you ask yourself, if you're going to like brainstorm it after the fact or critique it, is you ask yourself, am I checking all these boxes? Is my message doing all three of these? Okay, is my language accomplishing these? By the way, establishing credibility, this refers to credibility in you as the messenger, as well as credibility in the topic, in the message itself. There's two dynamics there. You can take a topic that somebody thinks is credible, but if it's coming from a messenger that you don't believe in, or that you don't think would necessarily know, or has a significant enough credentials to talk about it, you might not be persuaded, right? So you have it's called speaker credibility versus topic credibility, right? Or messenger versus message. Okay, and inspire action just means you're trying to get them to change a mindset, belief, behavior. And then provide value is, do you give them information that is useful? Okay, so I just want to give you a couple of quick tips and tricks for like how to do these things. So in terms of establishing credibility, you want to do that early on, right away, right? You want to get out there with, hey, I'm the one to listen to, or hey, this topic's important to care about it, right? So how do you do that? Well, the first thing you just got to do is don't be a jerk, like actually be respectful. Thank them for their time. Good to see you again. Kindness goes a long way. In fact, we'll talk about this a little bit later with persuasion. There's research that clearly shows that we're more likely to say yes to people that are kind to us, that we like, right? That we think are friendly. So being courteous. Another way to establish credibility is to identify common ground. So I have personal experience with this. I know where you're coming from, that kind of stuff, right? If you're doing A, I understand why you would do A. So sometimes you can say I have personal experience, so I definitely understand. Other times you can say, like, I can kind of see your thinking, I can see the benefits of A, but you can establish common ground. Obviously, you can, when we're talking about establishing credibility, some of that is just basically like the sources you use, where did you get your information, if we're talking about the topic. If we're talking about you, that could be things like your experience, your background, degrees, all that, certifications, that kind of stuff. So, put those out there early. Another common one that gets missed in terms of establishing credibility within a message is you want to be informative before you're persuasive. Okay. So you don't just start out with hard sell, hard sell, hard sell, because that turns most people away. A really good example of that, and a lot of you don't really get exposed to commercials very much anymore. You guys are all, you've cut the cord and you're streaming everything, and there's commercial-free apps and that sort of stuff. So you probably don't watch these much anymore, but it's sort of like how there used to be all the, and there still is if you hadn't cut the cord, but these like late night infomercials, right? Where the people are like, hey, do you want to know how to work from home and make all this money with very little effort, right? And they would come on at 1 a.m, and it's the kind of thing that you'd either, if you fell asleep with the TV on, you wake up during that. That's probably the only time you watch it or something, or you can't find the remote. Another good example is like modern day YouTube, right? So the ads on YouTube, where the person comes on and he's like, do you want to know the number one way to make money in the new economy? Well, I got to tell you, it's not from selling physical products on Amazon. And the guy like burns an Amazon package. It's like some 20-year-old on a beach, right? And he's like, do you want to know how I work 10 minutes a week to make $4,000 after taxes? Well, stay tuned. It's not from Amazon. It's from their other company, Audible, right? Or the next person comes on and he says, why are you not making money right now investing other people's money in real estate, right? Like you name all the different like stuff. And they're just like infomercials. They come on right away and the person's just counting the money, right? Or they're walking on the beach and they're like, I'm 19 and I have millions. This is my private island. Here I am in Monaco, right? Or whatever it is. And it's basically persuasion. And that's how infomercials used to be, right? Like the person comes on, and the ones that still exist, but like, do you want to make all this money, very little effort, you need no experience, it's like too good to be true, right? Now those turn most people away. When you get those ads on YouTube, if you're like 99.9% of people, you immediately hit skip, right? As soon as you can. Now, most people turn away from those. So what's so irritating about them? Why do you turn away? Why do you keep coming? Why didn't you just quit your job and immediately take this guy's seminar to make money in the new economy? Right? Because you probably thought, well, it sounds too good to be true, right? This is kind of ridiculous. There isn't, if you think about it from a logical standpoint, look at it this way. If you really could make just thousands a week for, an hour's worth of work at home in your spare time as your side hustle, first of all, if that was true, why would they be telling you that secret? Wouldn't you keep it for yourself? Because the more people that do it, all of a sudden you can't make that kind of money, right? I would think. So it's like, why are they giving the secret away? If they know a way to make money in real estate with other people's money, why would they tell you? Why would they let the cat out of the bag? Right? And you know that. You're not dumb. And so you immediately hit skip. Now, what's really going on here? They're being persuasive first. People like to think that they make orderly, rational, logical decisions. There's a phrase with persuasion. People love to buy, they hate to be sold. Sometimes it's talked about in marketing too. People love to buy, they hate to be sold. And here's what that means. When you go into Best Buy, you know that Best Buy is there to sell you something. You get it. Best Buy's not a non-profit, right? So you realize they're making money. But that being said, when you go into Best Buy and if you have questions about something or whatever it is you buy there, you want to feel like it was worth your money, right? That they didn't just take advantage of you, that you weren't just sold the snake oil. You weren't sold something you didn't really need. So in other words, we're willing to be persuaded. We're willing to buy, but we don't want to be sold, meaning we don't want to be sold the snake oil. We don't want to be taken advantage of. And when people are just persuasive right away, typically audience members report that they feel like this clearly isn't legit. You're just trying to take advantage of it. Because if you think in those commercials, they're all they do is they start out with all the great results, but they don't give any explanation how that's even logical, right? How that could happen, right? So that just turns people away. So you want to be informative first, because if you're informative first, if you're just immediately neutral and you're like, you're just giving them the basic facts before you then explain how it's going to be so great, whatever the great outcome is, then people feel like they're not being taken advantage of. Now they're willing to buy, right? Because they feel like, okay, you didn't come in right away promising me the moon and the stars. You came in, you explained the situation, you explained pretty rationally how this is potentially a really great opportunity for me. And then you talked about how if you take advantage of this, you might get the moon and the stars, right? But you did it in this like fashion to where I could feel like it's a logical, rational decision. People want to feel like their decisions are logical and rational, and they don't when you just start out right away with hard sell, hard sell, hard sell. There are some exceptions to this. So there are very rare situations where when the audience member is first exposed to a message, they've already kind of sold themselves and they're eager to buy. So in those situations, sometimes you can start with a hard sell because the audience is already there, right? They're already halfway to yes, so to speak. But in most situations, that's not the case. So you want to be informative first because it'll make people feel more comfortable that they're making a logical, rational decision and you're not taking advantage of them. By the way, you might be wondering, so if I'm telling you this doesn't work, why do they do it? Well, a couple of things. They're not actually infomercials, these you get rich quick kind of YouTube stuff. They're not actually going for most people. What they're going for is people maybe that are more financially desperate, right? They're kind of at the end of the rope. They got to do something. They're going for those types of situations. They're going for people who maybe for whatever reason are more likely to be susceptible to take a chance on this, right? They know that most people are just going to skip the ad. They know that most people it's going to turn them away. But they're not going for most people. Okay, so those are some ways to establish credibility. In terms of providing value, this just means is have a game plan to give them information that's useful. So if you're just being informative in general, ahead of time, it's a good idea to brainstorm new information, stuff that's not well known, and to clarify misunderstandings. So whatever the topic may be, you ask yourself, what's new? What do people not know about this? And what are some common misunderstandings? Another way to provide really valuable content is to ask yourself, who's likely to be an audience to this message and what would they want to hear? What are they going to be looking for? It doesn't even have to be what they want to hear. I mean, maybe you have a message that's a little critical or tough to hear, but it's asking yourself, what do they need to hear? Like, what would they want to hear? What would help them process this in the right way? Obviously, using legitimate arguments, like not using fallacies, not basically lying to your audience, right? Setting reasonable expectations is another great way to provide value. So these are all things that you can basically do. Now let me just give you some examples of this, like real quickly in action. So in terms of brainstorming what's new, what's not well known, or clarify misunderstandings. So for every and how this provides value and why it matters. So here's the example. For every type of case I do, I've brainstormed ahead of time what is information that is probably going to be new to them. It's not new to me because I'm a lawyer, but what's new to the average person? Or what's stuff that's not well known? Or what are common misunderstandings they have? And I lead with that. So the way to see that that's important is let's look at the examples if I didn't lead with that. So somebody comes into my office and they're looking to get divorced. Right? So they come in, they're like, I got 2 kids. I want to get divorced and I want to try to get custody, or at least joint custody. If I looked at them and said, okay, you could get divorced. I can help you with that. Might have to pay child support. Anyway, I'm going to need, and then I ask for please sign the retainer, right? Please sign the retainer agreement and give me some money. We prefer cash. Okay. How many people are going to be like, well, hey, who do I make the check out to? Right? They're going to go, thank you, Captain Obvious. I have Google. I could figure out that I could get divorced and that I might have to pay child support. Yeah, I get it. Like, did I tell them anything that they had to go to a lawyer to know? Nope. So when I don't do that, when I'm the mayor of Captain Obvious Town, right? Captain Obviousville, population me. When I do that, they're not really inspired to hire a lawyer or to hire me, certainly, because I'm just telling them stuff that they know they can get off Google, right? They're going to be like, I'm just going to handle the divorce myself, man. So I've already brainstormed again, what's the new stuff? And I tell them that. What's the misunderstandings? And I lead with that. So, for example, in that exact same scenario, instead of saying, well, yeah, you could get divorced, might have to pay child support, right? I will say, so you want custody? Yeah, I do. Have you moved out or not? Who's moved out? What was the living situation prior? What's it now? Well, I got my own apartment because the kids are comfortable in the house. And so it was just easier if I got my own apartment and then they're comfortable there. It's close to their school, yada, 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 right? So I will then tell them, okay, well, if you want custody, you should either try to move back in and have your ex move out, or have the kids move with you to the apartment. If you could get try to get an apartment close by the school, but try to have the kids with you. Because here's the deal. Courts actually don't favor mom over dad. That's a common misconception, that in custody disputes, they favor the mom. It's not that they favor the mom, but here's what it is. Does mom usually get custody? Yes. But here's what they favor. Here's like literally the law, which is that most states, in terms of custody, will give custody to who they consider as the primary caregiver, meaning who is taking the kids to school, tucking them in at night, making the lunches, wiping the runny noses, right? Well, that's who the kids are living with, typically, right? Like 99%. It's who the kids are living with. So if you want custody and you move out, you have now made yourself probably not the primary caregiver, which means you're probably not going to get custody, no matter who you are, whether you're mom or dad. So don't move out, right? Now, when I tell them that, I've now given them information they might not have known. And this brings up a point in life that sometimes, another like really good quote to keep in mind in life is sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And what I mean by that is, if you, like most people don't know that primary caregiver is a concept that relates to custody. Most people don't know that. Well, if you don't even know that, you don't even know what to Google. Like people who think like, well, I can just Google my way through this. Well, if you don't know all the terms and concepts, you don't even know what to Google. You don't know what you don't know. And so you're going to screw it up, right? So if I, instead of just saying something generic and stupid like you might have to pay child support or yeah, you can get divorced, if instead I'm telling them things like that, like, well, there's this thing called primary caregiver, and that's probably going to actually determine custody. So we're going to have to figure something out with that, with the living arrangements, if you really do want custody. When I say that, that person is likely to go, gee, maybe I need to hire a lawyer. Because I didn't even think of that, right? And I'm already hurting my case. So brainstorming ahead of time, like ask yourself, what in the whatever you're talking about, whatever the message is about, what do people not know? What is misunderstood? Again, using legitimate arguments, which is just, people aren't going to get any value out of it, something if they catch that you're lying to them, right? Or you're using fallacies and things, and they catch it, right? Another good way to provide value, just a little side note here, it says set reasonable expectations, meaning make sure you explain the ceiling and the floor of results. So a common mistake people make is they come in the room and they only talk about the best case scenario. Like, I want you to do A, and if you do A, let's say your results could be on a 0 is no change, no benefit. 1 is some change, 10 is the best case scenario. So a lot of times the persuasion, what happens is people come in the room and they say, if you do what I want, you can get a 10, you can get a 10, you can get a 10. Wouldn't that be great? I really hope you get a 10. People are like, I'd like a shiny 10. And so let's say you talk to a room full of people, there's 30 people and 20 say yes, and you come back a month later. And so by the way, what you did in the scenario is you just described the ceiling, like the best case scenario, not the floor. You didn't talk about 1s or 2s that they could also get. Well, here's what you've done here. You kind of provided value in the moment because you're like, if you do A, you can have a benefit. That'd be great. But the people that don't get the 10, because most people are not, because by definition, the 10 is the best case scenario, they're all going to be pissed. Because all you did was describe the moon and the stars. So when they don't get it, they're going to be mad because they're going to go, "Oh, I didn't really get the moon and the stars," right? So now they're going to think you didn't provide them any value, like what you were talking about was all BS because I didn't get the best case scenario. So when you only talk about the best case scenario in a situation when trying to persuade somebody, what you're basically doing is setting yourself up for most people to be pissed at you. Because everybody who does, let's say the 20 people said yes and 4 get a 10 and 7 get a 5 and there's a couple people that got a 3 and there's some people that got a 2. Maybe half of them got a 10, doesn't matter. The people that don't get a 10, all of them are going to be, it's not they're going to be pissed, but they're going to be upset. They're going to be disappointed, right? Because you talked about a 10 and I didn't get a 10. Now, if you set reasonable expectations, so in that first scenario, you just set yourself up for anybody who doesn't get a 10 to be disappointed. So most people will be disappointed in the situation are you. But instead, if you described all the possible outcomes, so you said, I want you to do A, and if you do what I want, you could get a 10. That's the moon and the stars. You could get that, and I really hope you do. But even if you don't, you can get a 5, you can get a 4, you can get a 7, you can get a 2. In other words, no matter what happens, you're going to get a positive result, which means you have something to gain and nothing to lose by doing what I want. Because either way, you will be better off tomorrow than you are today. So now when those 20 people come back, anybody that got a tangible result, anybody that got a 1 or above is probably not going to be disappointed because you were honest and transparent right from the beginning, which basically said you're going to gain something and you won't lose anything. So why say no when it feels so good to say yes, right? I sell smiles, right? You tell that you basically are now saying you will gain something, right? You could get a 2. I hope you get a 10. But if you get the 5, that's 5 is better than a 0 where you're at today. The 2 is still better, right? And so setting reasonable expectations, talking about all the possible beneficial outcomes, or just all the outcomes in general, makes people feel like A, you're more honest and transparent, but B, that what you told them was worthwhile. And even the people when they've gotten the results, when they get a 2, or the person and they're sitting next to somebody got a 10, both are going to feel it was worthwhile, right? Because both got something out of the situation. They both got value. So that's what you want to do to provide value. Now, I just a little more like side note thing here to think about in terms of how this is working in practicality in everyday life right now is you see a lot of this with people who are in the space of selling content, right? So think of YouTubers, think of podcasts, things like their business is content, right? That they create. And one of the ways that they sort of use the provide value concept to monopolize it, to make money off of it, is basically this notion of you provide, and it doesn't have to be like people that do content. This is not, nobody's reinventing the wheel here. This is a business concept that's been used in every industry, I'm sure, which is that you provide people something valuable and good for free with the hope that they'll pay for more. So think of YouTube channels that are popular, and there's all kinds of free content on there, but they'll say, do you want bonus episodes? Well, become a Patreon member, right? Subscribe to the plus version of my YouTube channel, and you'll get bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, extra content, right? Podcasts, there's podcasts like that, where there's the normal free podcast, but if you pay a certain subscription, you can get bonus episodes. Well, what are they doing? The free stuff, they want to make it good. That's how a channel blows up, or that's how a podcast becomes popular. But the idea is give them something for free, give them good value, which also tells you why value is important, because you can build your brand around it. But you provide good value for free, and then maybe you can get them to pay for more later, right? That's what you're kind of hoping for. So providing value is certainly important. And then finally, inspiring action, which is basically changing a mindset or a behavior. We're going to talk about persuasion probably in a future video, but the biggest way to sort of inspire action or a change, first of all, you have to have a strong motivational link. You want to walk people through the process, secondly, and then finally, you want to emphasize that your audience is capable of doing what you're advocating for. And again, I am really simplifying and condensing down some concepts here, but here's what we're looking at. So a strong motivational link. A motivational link is basically why your audience should care about the topic and do what you want, wait for it, right now. So you need urgency. So one of the common mistakes people make is they assume that if you just come in the room and just tell them, well, this is important, that, the product or service will just sell itself, right? And that's not true, by the way. Nothing sells itself. That's just total misnomer. That's BS. That's not true. First of all, you already know that. So for an example, take it would be like, let's say I was giving a speech, and I was giving a speech on how you should drink more water. It's good for you. And so I come in the room and I'm like, you should drink more water. And I'm like chucking free Aquafinas at you. Is that going to, like, let's say it's a college class. Is that going to make you drink more water? Like that day? Probably not. You're going to like open a Red Bull while I'm talking. Okay. Now, why is that? Because you're going to, you know, water is healthier for you. You know, you should drink more water. H2O. It's got to hydrate. But you're going to look at that and go, well, I could all, I'll start that tomorrow. I'm young. I got plenty of time to take care of myself, right? So in other words, one of the things that when you just have a motivational link of, well, you should care the product sells itself, build it and they will come. These are all BS. It's not true, right? Again, build it and they will come. Here's how, you already know that's BS. Here's why that's BS. Have you ever seen a franchise be successful in one location and fail in another? Happens all the time, right? Well, I thought build it and they will come. Why don't the masses gather around the chain that failed? Right? Because that's not how it works. Location matters. Right? People choose convenience sometimes. So, a lot of times, right? So, and nothing sells itself because when you think something's just going to sell itself, so you just have them, like, you just walk in the room and be like, well, you should care. Isn't that obvious? People aren't going to be like, you had me at hello, because here's the problem. You are assuming that people do what they know they should, and they don't. A lot of people can't go a single day doing everything they know they should. Like just making what they know logically, intellectually in their head is the right thing to do. They can't even go a day, half a day with doing that. Because we'll do it someday, we'll do it later, right? I got plenty of time, or they just don't really want to do the right thing. They kind of emotionally want to do something else. And so you can't just have a motivation link that's like, well, you should just care. Isn't that obvious? You need to explain to them why it matters right now. You have to have a sense of urgency. Now, if you do that, you can change people's minds. You can get them to change their behavior. Walk them through the process. You got to lead the horse to water. You got to explain to people, here's all the ways to do something. If you do that, you're more likely to inspire action, get change of mindset, change of behavior. And then a third one is you have to emphasize how your audience is capable. So one of the big barriers that happens with persuasion is that somebody comes in the room and they say, you should do A, it would be great for you. And again, you could describe the floor and the ceiling of results. You're like, if you do A, you got something to gain, nothing to lose, because you could have a 10 or a 2 or a 3. But again, you'll be better off tomorrow than you are today. But the problem is a lot of people will hear those messages and they'll go, you know what? You're right. That sounds like it's doable for people. It sounds like it's beneficial to people. And I believe people could do that, but it's other people, not me. I can't. So we have a self-defeating sort of, like if I'm sure you've heard at some point of the notion of like imposter syndrome. This is like when people start a job or they're employed somewhere and they think, well, I'm not really competent. They're going to figure it out. And when they do, I'll get fired, right? Because I really can't do this. I'm really faking it, hoping that I'll make it, right? And that's really common. But what people don't always realize in our psychology is that we tend to have that self-defeating, almost like imposter syndrome-like mindset. A lot of people do anyway. When it comes to accomplishing certain things, they just think, well, other people could do it, but I can't do it. Now, a lot of times this is just total BS, and you could do it, right? But you do have to overcome that with some people. So depending on what you're trying to persuade them about, and if you want to change a mindset or a behavior, you should focus on really emphasizing they're capable of this. So again, these 3 purposes of rhetoric are establish credibility in the topic and you as the presenter or the messenger and the message, provide value, which is give them information that is useful to them, And then inspiring action is trying to change a mindset of behavior. Just to kind of wrap that up, I will say that it's generally speaking better to change a mindset than a behavior, because if you change a mindset, theoretically, that changes multiple behaviors, right? It sort of leads to, because supposedly we act in a way that's aligned with how we think, right? So, excuse me, if you change a mindset, it's usually the most effective thing to do versus just trying to get a behavioral change. Now, obviously, depending on the situation, some people are just looking for a behavior change in the moment, but generally you do want to focus on changing a mindset. Okay, last little thing we're going to talk about in this section on language is self-disclosure, and just sort of some things to keep in mind with this. So this is basically like the language you use, and really what I'm talking about here is not necessarily word choice so much as it is topic choice. And so when you disclose things to people, what are the risks and benefits? So benefits are, there's a catharsis, relief, which is basically just, there's a value sometimes in just getting something off your chest, right? Sometimes you just need to talk about it. It can lead to clarification of things. By talking it out with somebody, you get really a broader clarification of a topic or an idea, or where they stand or where you stand, or did you do the right thing? So that's where self-validation comes in. Sometimes we engage in self-disclosure to other people because we kind of want them to validate that we did the right thing, right? That we're on the right track, or whatever our opinion or even interpretation of something was. Sometimes we do it for social influence. This is the classic where you tell somebody something about you because you think it's going to shape how they view you or treat you, right? And, we certainly always hear this concept of like honesty is the best policy, and it's okay to be an open book and not sort of hide things. And look, generally that's probably correct, but there are some risks to disclosure. It's not all fun and games here, right? Like there's some real risks. So what are the risks? Negative impression of you. So this is basically, people might not view you the same anymore, right? Because of what you said to them. And therefore, or they judge you, so to speak, right? And it's kind of hard to fix that once that's happened. So that can happen to you. Decrease in relational satisfaction. So this is the classic, you told somebody something and now they are disappointed in you. They've judged you for some reason, so now they don't see you the same way, so now that relationship's been affected, right? Loss of influence. So you disclose something, so now people don't respect you the same way anymore, right? Or they don't value your opinion the same way anymore because it was something negative, right? So you have to be careful about that. And then hurting other people's feelings. So this is just, here's the deal with this. Sometimes people, you have to keep sometimes you got to ask yourself, like, what's the impact of what I'm saying to this person? And does it cause more harm than good? You'll see people sometimes disclose things because they want to get it off their chest. They want to tell somebody, and they know that whoever they tell, it might hurt their feelings or hurt them, but they go ahead and say it. And a lot of times because they're kind of justifying to themselves this notion of, well, they have a right to know, or I need to get it out, or so what's really going on is they kind of want to for themselves discuss it, right? They want to get it off their chest and just sort of come clean. But by doing that, though, you're telling that other person something that could really hurt them, and so therefore you just hurt the other person. What I'm saying here is, now look, there are obviously situations that people have a right to know, right? So, and I believe that in a lot of situations, right, that people have a right to know sometimes. This would be like, let's say there's infidelity in a relationship. And so people are still together, somebody cheated. Look, the person who got cheated on has a right to know, I think. Right? I think they deserve to know the truth in that scenario. But let's take that exact same scenario. But let's say now the couple's broken up. So they've broken up. They're not really friends anymore. They didn't break up because of the cheating, but they're not really friends. They're not really in contact. But the person who cheated wants to kind of come clean. They want to get it off their chest. They want to tell somebody, and they want to kind of go ahead and tell the other person. So this is a classic example of that. So what good is that going to do? Like, what good will come of that? You're no longer friends with them. You no longer see them. You broke up for entirely different reasons. And you can tell yourself, well, they have a right to know. But you're probably more just telling them for you because you want to get it off your chest. It's really kind of about you because all it's going to do is hurt them. So should you tell them that? That in that scenario, I think you got to kind of think about it. And my point is, sometimes when you're going to like say things about yourself, you got to ask yourself, what is going to be, have you game theoried this out? Meaning, have you plotted out all the potential outcomes about how people are going to view this and how it's going to affect them? And if it's most likely to be negative or hurt them, or if most of the scenarios are bad and that they just hurt other people, what I'm basically saying is maybe you should reconsider if you should disclose that. Right? Because all you're doing is hurting the situation or hurting them. They don't really need to know that. Okay? So it's just something to think about. Again, if this isn't a right or wrong, it's like a personal life thing. I am just explaining sort of like the devil's advocate of this notion of honesty is always the best policy. Because I think sometimes a good way I heard this phrase once was sometimes a lie accomplishes more good than the truth. And all I'm sort of suggesting is maybe think about that. That there are times when that accomplishes more good than the truth. And the truth is no longer in a space where it's beneficial to the parties involved. So therefore, maybe you don't need to say it, right? Or you get it off your chest, say it to somebody else. Say it to a counselor. Say it to, right? Somebody, I mentioned a counselor because they'd be like a third party. They wouldn't tell the person, blah, blah, blah. So just think about these dynamics when you're considering self-disclosing things to other people. What are some alternatives to self-disclosure? And again, there's plenty of times where it's the right thing to do, and it's a good thing. It can bring people closer together, right? So I mentioned that, they could judge you in a negative way and all these sorts of things. But remember to keep in mind that, again, there's two sides to that coin. They could also judge you in a positive way, right? They could also sometimes respect you more because you came clean, all that sort of stuff. So it's a personal choice for you. I'm just trying to explain some of the different dynamics involved with the pros and cons of self-disclosure. What are some alternatives? So you could hint. If you don't want to totally like just say something, hinting or being ambiguous, right? Just sort of throwing it out there kind of, but not completely saying it. Again, sometimes that is the best path. You just have to figure out what a good example of where hinting or being ambiguous might be the best path of where you want to disclose something, but you don't want to do it super direct is maybe you're dealing with people that are really defensive, right? And if you are like really blunt about it, they're just gonna put up a wall and you're not going to get anywhere with them, right? So sometimes that's a better way. Sometimes being silent, because again, the truth can cause more harm than a lie would, or just lying, right? So you just have to, again, you have to gauge the situation, and that's where it says keep the end in mind. That's where I'm referring to, like, is it doing more good or is it doing more harm to say what you're going to say? So again, just playing devil's advocate, not saying you shouldn't be honest with people, just saying some factors to consider. All right, another thing that has been looked at with self-disclosure and sort of why it matters, or why it matters to be self-aware. This is the last little thing that we're going to check out today, or at least in this language section of videos, and that is something called the Johari window. Now, you might have seen this in a psych class or some other classes that you would have taken, but what this is basically looking at is it's saying when it comes to information about you can fall into four areas, okay? So you have the open area. So this is information known to everyone. So you know it about you and they know it about you. The blind area. So this is information that other people know about you. They've observed it, but you are not aware of it. You don't know it. You just have a blind spot to this, so to speak. Hidden area, that's the reverse. So now you know it. It's something true about you, but you don't tell other people, right? So it's not known by others, or they haven't picked up on it. Okay, and then finally you have unknown information. So this is information that is not known by you. Other people haven't observed it, like nobody knows it. So a couple of takeaways here as to why this kind of matters. So the first sort of reason that this matters is, let's take that last category, the unknown category. The reason the Johari window is super important is that The most dangerous place for information about you to be, or what's going on in your world and your life, is the unknown area. So you don't know it and they don't know it. Why is that dangerous? Because you can't fix a problem you're not aware of. Right? You can't address something that you don't know about. And if you don't know it because you're not self-aware, you're not introspective, you're not trying to like figure it out about you, you're just blind to it for whatever reason, and they don't know it, they're not going to be able to tell you about it, so it never gets fixed, right? So you never want, what I'm trying to say is you never want information in the unknown area. So how do you get it there? Well, one is you got to think about you, and you got to be self-aware. Why do I do what I do? What do I have a tendency to do? And just sort of be aware of your mindset and your actions, okay? And if you're very self-aware, honest with yourself about who you are and your motivations for doing things and what you do and when, then at least it will be in the hidden area, which is known to you but not necessarily known to others, right? Like, so, and these other ones aren't as dangerous. So for example, or they have some practical real benefits. So again, going with that hidden area. So this is stuff that you know about you, but you don't tell other people. Well, obviously there's good reasons to do that. I mean, we just talked about how when you choose not to self-disclose, you're keeping information in that hidden area, right? You know it, but you don't tell them. Sometimes there's good reasons to do it, because again, the truth could hurt people more than actually have a benefit. Sometimes it's just something you know people would judge you about, so you don't want them to know. There could be a variety of reasons, right? You're not ready to tell them yet or something like that. But that information isn't necessarily, it's not like inherently destructive, because at least you're aware of it. So you can still fix or address any issues or problems because you are aware of it, right? It's just that you're hiding it from other people. So that's fine. Open area, like you know it and you're transparent, other people know it, that can be fine too, as long as there's no harm in them knowing it about you, right? Because now, if there's a problem that comes up, they can point it out, or you would catch it yourselves because you're honest with yourself about it and they know about it too. So the open area is fine. The hidden area can be fine. The blind area can be fine too, in the sense of, look, you always want to be self-aware. So you don't want to end up where there's a situation where people outside of you are picking up things about you and you're not picking them up, right? Like, that's not great. But at least if you have friends and people around you, people in your life who can pick up the information about you that you're not aware of, you can still fix the problem, right? So information in the blind area kind of gets there by accident. Like, you're just not self-aware of the thing, but other people are. But hey, no harm, no foul, right? If they can point it out to you, maybe you can take corrective measures. So that can be okay too. So, and now, by the way, so now that you kind of know that, like, these first three all have some potential benefits and the last one's the real bad one, here's the real takeaways from this. So again, the first big takeaway is that you don't want information in the unknown area. You don't want to be in a situation where you're not self-aware, you're not honest with yourself about who you are and what you are, and the people around you don't know it either, right? Or whatever, or you're not honest with yourself about a problem and the people around you aren't aware of the problem either. The reason that's so dangerous is, again, because you can't fix something you don't know about it. And if you don't know about it and they don't know about it, you're not going to tell yourself to fix it and they're not going to tell you to fix it, right? So that's bad. So you want to be self-aware and also hope that the people you're around, your friends, your family, are self-aware of these things too. The other sort of like big takeaway, I think, is, as far as like a potential leverage point, is stuff in the blind area. So this is known to others and not you. So here's where this is kind of important. You know what that's kind of telling you? Is be careful about being really isolated, where you don't have people close enough to you to kind of talk to you about potential problems going on in your life, or be honest with you about something that's going on, because you're not catching it, because you're not self-aware of it. When you crawl under a rock, or you put yourself in a shell to where you're not really interacting with people in the outside world, or you're not really close to anybody, the problem is you can't actually take advantage of blind information. So that's stuff, again, that you don't pick up about you, but they do. Well, if they don't exist, you don't have friends, right? Or people close to you, they can't pick up the information that you don't know, right? And tell you, here's what's going on. here's a pattern I've noticed for better or for worse, right? For good or for bad. So you don't want to be isolated. You want to have people close to you, because if you have people close to you, that means that what they pick up about you now that you're not aware of is blind information, and they can hope they care about you. That's why they're your friend. Hopefully they can use that to help you, right? By telling you this stuff. So I guess that second big takeaway is that one of the reasons it's important to have people in your life who care about you and are reasonably close to you is because they're going to have some blind information. They're going to start to pick up some things about you that you don't pick up, that if you're receptive to the information, that you can then leverage to improve the quality of your life, right? So just something to keep in mind. Now, look, so we're all like different levels of sociability. So in other words, we all know people that are like social butterflies, and then we also know people that are more, they're comfortable being by themselves, and they're a little more introverted, right? Which again, doesn't mean sometimes it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Maybe you're just not, you're a little more antisocial. That's all. I mean, it could be unhealthy psychologically, but it doesn't mean it is, right? Some people just are comfortable being by themselves and hanging out by themselves. But what I'm saying is, you do want to have some people close to you who can observe the things that you're not picking up. So I think that and avoiding the unknown area are kind of the two big takeaways. If you think of hidden, which is stuff that's known by you but not other people because you're like not telling them, what that's talking about is self-disclosure, which we just talked about, right? That's information that you're choosing to self-disclose one way or the other. So, and then obviously information that's in the open area is good too, because again, you know it, they know it, we can all fix the problem. So these are just some dynamics of self-disclosure that I think were important to sort of talk about. So thanks for sort of sticking through this video. I know language, again, we're jumping around to a lot of different topics, whether it's persuasion, a lot of persuasion focused in this particular section, talking about impacts and all this sorts of stuff, navigational phrases. We're jumping around to a lot of different topics, but again, it's just such a big topic. There's just so many things that you can discuss with language. So I hope you found that useful, and I will hopefully see you guys in the next video.